Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 241, Numbers at a Disadvantage. That's right, Kant had some impression. Look at those demon troops behind the city walls, strangling the game Kant was once familiar with. Invincible hero. The dark red demon was nearly half a meter tall and looked like a sturdy dwarf. It was flapping the small wings on its back and was rapidly jumping forward. It was holding a black cast iron short fork, and its eyes were full of cunning and cruelty. In Kant's eyes, it was really like the most basic troop class of hell in the game, the demon infant. There was a slight commotion among the troops that were recruited by the system. This was not an ordinary enemy. They had never encountered such a demon troop before, let alone start a war. Although the 188 Swadian heavy cavalry had a similar experience. It was a war against the expedition army of the Kingdom of Grey Mane. However, the Jack Allen were different from the demons. For example, the demons that were currently appearing on the ruins of the city walls, their strange appearances, and the evil aura that they were emitting, they looked like they were having a heart attack. Although they did not fear death, many of the soldiers were still nervous. This was the fear towards the legendary creatures. The Mage Apprentices were students to begin with. They were still in the internship period and could not be considered real mages. Hence, their morale and psychological quality were low. Standing behind Kant, the 7 Mage Apprentices reminded him in a panic, that's the imp. It's the most typical troop class of cannon fodder in the forces of hell. Although it looks weak, its strength, speed, and agility are far stronger than the average human peasant. Even the militia would not be able to fight against these imps. Yes, I understand. Kant nodded calmly. One could tell just by looking at the imps' bodies. Although they were short, they were as strong as tree stumps. Their thighs and arms, as well as the skin under their chests, were filled with muscles. The 2 wings on their backs were not decorative. When the wings flapped vigorously, they could even bring in a gust of wind. As the infantile imps hopped on their hind legs like antelopes, they provided additional support. They could even provide a short gliding ability, allowing them to fly 7 meters away. It was indeed as the Mage Apprentices had said, their agility and speed were very strong. But what made Kant even more worried was behind them. The long-horned demon. Although its body was bent, it was nearly 3 meters tall, and the muscles all over its body were protruding clearly. Its thick arms hung on the ground, and a number of sharp spikes grew on its broad back, from its neck to its spine. Its front hands were like beast claws, much thicker than its hind legs, and also had a dark metallic luster. As it roared, it spewed out a little black smoke, looking ferocious and terrifying. His eyes were as violent and crazy as a demon's. It was obvious that the long-horned demons, who did not have any weapons, relied on brute force and brutal emotions to fight. This is not an optimistic battle. Kant spoke slowly. Although these demons from hell were in a messy formation, or rather, there was no so-called formation at all, they were still the number 1 enemy by relying on their brutal and crazy fearlessness. It was comparable to the Jack Allen expeditionary army that Trondheim had encountered when he was still a fortress. The only exception. Perhaps it was because the number of demons from hell was relatively small. Yes, it's not optimistic. Van Dijk nodded and said calmly, we will do our best. Very good. Kant chuckled. That was enough. He turned his head to look behind him with a grim expression. There was a determination to sacrifice in his gloomy eyes. He took a deep breath, he said in a deep voice, in this battle, we can only choose to win because behind us is Aaron and Trondheim. There is no way out. It is impossible for us to choose to compromise. With his legs tightly clamped on his warhorse, Kant pointed the knight's sword in his right hand to the front while his left hand held the horn tightly. He shouted in a deep voice, there is no excuse to escape. We are all for victory. For victory. The many soldiers behind him let out a furious roar as if they were venting their anger. And then, the battle began. The golden lion on the red bottom began to flutter in the air. The flag fluttered even though there was no wind, as if it was being blown by a strong wind. The troops that were already in formation began to push forward. The archers were in the front while the infantrymen were at the back. The cavalry occupied the two wings. It was a conventional battle formation. It was close to a range of 200 meters. At the very front, the archers of Ravenstone were the first to draw their bows and shoot arrows. There were a total of 87 rangers and patrollers. Among them, there were 47 rangers of Ravestone who were archery masters and had excellent archery skills. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. In an instant, a rain of arrows formed by conical arrows rained down continuously. They were the first to attack. Kant and the others would not pay attention to their manners with the hell demons. What they wanted was for them to use the rain of arrows to continuously attack the enemies before they formed a formation when they left the city wall. This would weaken the enemy's morale at the same time. According to Kant's understanding, although the demons were violent and crazy, they also had brains to think. This meant that they also had morale. The Mage apprentices from the Emphoth Empire had already reported this point. The rain of arrows that fell on them instantly caused many of the little demons that were jumping at the front to collapse. They let out strange cries and occasionally, there would be arrows that hit the salt mines directly. The arrows went straight into their brains, making these little demons seem vicious and cunning as well. The imps who were like brutal terrorists were instantly fatal. It seemed that even the imps were like flesh and blood, with fatal points. This was good news. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled, but his face was still calm. He pointed the knight's sword in his right hand forward and ordered in a deep voice, "Ban Dake, lead the crossbowmen and shoot freely." "Understood." Ban Dake answered in a low voice. Raising the siege crossbow in his hand, the 20 Rodix sniper crossbowmen beside him also raised their own siege crossbows. The steel bolts that were meticulously forged by Loduok were all made of steel. They were already stuck in the firing slot of the siege crossbow. As they aimed at the wall where the imp and the long-horned demon came out, they pulled the trigger heavily. Bang 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 bang. The fine and powerful bowstring vibrated violently. Between the slightly parabolic trajectory of the cone arrow, the straight silver light instantly tore through the void and appeared in front of the imp who was still jumping. It was a steel bolt shot by the siege crossbow. After being shot by the siege crossbow, this kind of steel bolt was extremely powerful and had an extremely strong aftershock. Even the head of the imp in the front row could not withstand the steel crossbow that came in an instant. It was pierced through and crushed the brain matter in the head. From the inside out, the back of the head was sent flying, bringing along the white brain matter and bright red blood. It splashed all over the bodies of the surrounding demons. The power of the steel crossbow actually killed the imp instantly. "Continue shooting." Kant, however, still gave the order in a deep voice. Now was not the time to be excited. Although they knew that the demon army still had flesh and blood, and were creatures that could be killed by ordinary means, their numbers were simply too many. So many that Kant could not even imagine. At the ruins of the city wall, the enormous abyss demon had already left, seemingly uninterested in the following battle. However, a large number of demon troops appeared in the square. They were howling and roaring in a simple and strange demon language. They began to push forward in Kant's direction. Less than 200 meters away, the dark mass of red and black demons was almost like a tide. There were also many demonized creatures mixed within. The wanton roars were obviously driven by these demons. According to Kant's estimation, the number of imps was close to 500, the number of long-horned demons was close to 200, and the number of demonic creatures mixed with them was also close to 500. Overall, Kant's army was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Even if the rain of arrows poured down, the bolts were extremely fast, and a large number of imps and demonic creatures fell. However, the entire demon army that was pressing down on them had yet to suffer a severe blow. After all, there were more than 1,000 of them. The ones at the front were the low-level imps and the beast-like demonized creatures. Clearly, the long-horned demons that were the main force of the war had yet to be injured. Even if they were hit by the all arrows, if they were not vital parts, they would casually wave their hands and pull them out. The muscles on the bodies of these long-horned demons were the best armor. They did not care at all. The distance of 200 meters was not far to begin with. Under the rain of arrows and bolts, more and more imps and demonized creatures were approaching the 50-meter area. The long-horned demons, who were good at close combat, shrank back. The battle mentality of this group of demons was very clear. It was to follow the imps and demonized creatures as cannon fodder and let the long-horned demons get close to the enemy's front line. Then, they would use their burly and strong bodies to wreak havoc among the enemy, completely destroying the enemy's line of defense, crushing the enemy's will to resist, and gaining the initiative on the battlefield. Thus, they would win. To the demons, the imps with low combat power were cannon fodder. As for the demonized creatures that were nurtured with demon blood and wild beasts, they were not even cannon fodder. If it was not for the fact that the Lord of the Great Abyss had just broken the seal and awakened, and all the power that had dissipated was in this underground city and could not be recovered, they could only use this power to transform wild beasts into the lowest level demon servants and beasts to make up for the current lack of military strength. If it was thousands of years ago, when hell was at war with the gods, even the long-horned demons were cannon fodder, and the Lord of the Abyss was an existence that could be sacrificed. The battle situation was so tragic that it was close to genocide. Now, it was just a small fight. As the supreme lord of the demons of hell, the king of evil, and the ruler of the flames, Aamon Qieke disdained to watch such a battle. Humans, in his eyes, were once the servant race of the gods. No, it should be said that they were a slave race, born weak humans. On the battlefield, facing the devils, the troops almost collapsed at the touch. Only the troops formed by the blood descendants of the gods could resist the attacks of the devils. Correspondingly, if an army formed by humans launched an attack, the demons would not even care about it. They would just casually send out the lowest level demon army to deal with it. From ancient times until now, it was the upper level demons and blood descendants of the gods that were the true main force of the battlefield. Chapter 242, The Charge That Would Determine the Battle Outcome. The imps, who were in greater numbers, flapped their wings and leaped up. Their dwarf-like bodies were like agile springboks. They began to glide with the help of the wings on their backs. Their hands gripped tightly onto the short iron pitchforks. When they were about to come into contact with Kant's troops, they actually burst out with extremely fast speed. They ran at high speed. When they were about to approach the enemy's formation, they would jump and glide, using inertia to charge at the enemy's troops. This was the tactic that the imps were used to. If the ordinary human troops, such as the enlisted peasant and armed militia, did not have enough training and had low morale, it was estimated that the imps would not be able to hold on for long as they glided and charged like flying. Their morale would plummet due to the continuous casualties on their side. In the end, they would flee until the entire line collapsed under the impact. Such a tactic was similar to cavalry charging, but it was also similar to the long lance soldiers standing side by side. The aim was to eliminate the enemy line and cause chaos to the entire army. One had to know that the long-horned demons at the rear were the main force of the battle. The strength of their two arms was enough to tear apart the human body. They were caught in close combat and chaotic battle. The human troops were never the ones who had the advantage. It was the demons who had extremely strong physical attributes, high combat strength, cruel and violent personalities, and were almost crazy. Although the long-horned demons were inferior demons, their physical attributes were very high. It was enough to be compared to the Jack Allen. It was not the low-level Jack Allen who lacked food and clothing and drank raw meat and blood, but the high-level Jack Allen who lived on the Mannheim coast and had sufficient food and nutrition. They had undergone strict military training. In terms of physique and figure, the long-horned demon was not at a disadvantage. Prepare for battle. Van Dijk pulled out the Teutonic sword behind his back, his expression grim. As the imp and the demonized creature rapidly approached, Rhodix's sniper crossbowmen, the Ravenstone Rangers, and the Ravenstone patrollers all began to retreat to the sides. At the same time, 40 Rhodix sergeants had brought 200 Rhodix proficient spear wielders in front of them. 240 people formed a phalanx of spears. Rhodix's proficient spear-wielding soldiers bowed slightly. In front of the 3 rows were dense and sharpened spearheads. The 3-meter-long spear was raised diagonally, just in time to aim at the approaching imp who was flapping its wings and gliding towards them at high speed. For Lord Kent. The uniform movements of the spears instantly thrust out. Countless sharp spears stabbed out at an extremely fast speed in a small area. Ga. The imp at the front let out a sorrowful cry. The cunning and cruelty in its eyes turned into fear and uneasiness along with the rapidly approaching spear. It flapped its wings and wanted to fly to the side, but the 3 rows of spears in front of it were like chopping boards, giving them nowhere to run. Even the demonized creatures that were running parallel to each other and roaring as they pounced over, similarly received the 3 rows of spearheads that were raised horizontally and diagonally. In a very small area, there was nowhere to run and they could only receive the stab of the spear. Puff 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 puff. The tip of the spear pierced deeply into the imp's body. The thick and long spear did not allow the gliding imps to appear in front of them at all. Relying on the inertia of the gliding imps, as well as the force of the sudden thrust, they were instantly pierced into meat skewers. Ga. Unpleasant howls continued to be heard. The vitality of these imps was tenacious. Many of them struggled and flapped their wings even though their chests and abdomens were pierced, twisting their bodies back and forth on the raised spear, hoping to pull themselves off the spear. However, the final result was that a large amount of dark red blood splattered all over the stone floor beneath their feet, dyeing it with fluorescent moss that could be seen everywhere. It was blood red and very terrifying. Prepare close-range weapons. Bandake's orders continued to appear. His voice was clear and calm. Understood. Rhodix's infantrymen, who had yet to suffer any casualties, responded. They immediately gave up on the spear that had already pierced through countless imps and demonized creatures. With a flip of their hands, they placed the wide shield and wide shield on their backs on their left arms. At the same time, their right hands had already pulled out their spiked warmers and held them tightly. They coldly looked at the long-horned demons that were crowding over and shouted, "Kill!" They did not raise their weapons high and take a step forward. Instead, their left arm moved forward, allowing the wide shield that were made of wood and leather nails to stand in front of them like a small door. They placed their shoulders behind the door and arranged themselves into the shape of a city wall. They gritted their teeth and let out angry roars. As the long-horned demons crashed heavily into them, they used all their strength to push forward. Bang 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 bang. Muffled sounds reverberated, and the long-horned demons rammed fiercely. Rhodix soldiers were in the middle, and on both sides were Rhodix's skilled spear wielders. They could use broad shields to form a seemingly indestructible shield wall, but under the frenzied ramming of the long-horned demons, it was still as if he had been charged by the Swadian heavy cavalry, and they were forced to retreat in an instant. The entire defensive shield wall was in disarray, and at the front row, Rhodix's most refined broad shield even had a few cracks and dents. His left arm was trembling, and he was temporarily powerless. The long-horned demon's charge was simply too strong. Rhodix soldiers and the proficient spear wielder had looks of shock on their faces. Only by coming into contact with it did they truly understand the power of the demon. Ordinary humans were truly unable to resist it. Just by looking at the current close combat situation, their hearts had fallen into an abyss. The long-horned demon's close combat was simply too strong. Its metallic lustrous arms waved like 2 of the heaviest heavy hammers, whizzing down. If they were unable to dodge in time or did not use their shields to block it, even the Rhodix's face was flushed red as he was sent flying to the side, spitting out large mouthfuls of blood. It was even mixed with fresh blood, and it looked like he was going to die. Blunt force was not something that could only stun people in the game. In reality, it was a powerful attack that was comparable to stabbing and slashing. Once a heavy weapon was used to blunt force, the powerful force would be transmitted to the weak body, and it was enough to shatter the internal organs. The 2 sets of heavy mail armor on the soldier, plus the light leather armor and linen coat, were still unable to block the long-horned demon's blunt force. Not to mention those skilled spear-wielding soldiers who only wore mail armor and leather coats. The long-horned demons were cheering. In just a short moment, nearly 30 human infantrymen were smashed to the ground, and even more infantrymen were injured in varying degrees. The imps and demonized creatures had already charged in. Relying on the might of the long-horned demons, Kant's entire infantryman formation was in a mess. Rhodix's infantrymen, who were already at a disadvantage in numbers, even began to become unstable with the attacks of the demon troops. The battle situation was extremely dangerous. Woo! The dull sound of a horn suddenly sounded behind them. With some length, the sound of the horn entered the ears of the many Rhodix infantry soldiers. Kant blew the commanding power. Mysterious system rules instantly spread out, directly appearing in the bodies of the many infantry soldiers, stabilizing their morale and at the same time rousing their emotions. Their hearts were beating rapidly, and Rhodix's infantrymen, who had been knocked into a mess, and who had been forced to raise their shields in vain, and who had been forced to retreat by the long-horned demons with their claws, actually steadied their steps, bending forward to hold on. With their high morale, they maintained the crumbling line. For victory, for Lord Kant, let's fight with blood. Van Dijk took the opportunity to shout. Let's fight with blood. Rhodix's infantrymen responded at the same time. They roared and withstood the onslaught. Like giant hammers, they pulled out their own warhammer at the same time and fiercely hammered at their waists. Warhammer was the evolution of the pickaxe. It was the most popular close-range weapon used by the Kingdom of Rhodix and the Kingdom of Swadia. It was small and easy to carry. It moved quickly, and the tip of the crane's beak had the ability to pierce through armor. Now, as the Rhodix infantrymen continued to wave at the chest and abdomen of the long-horned demon with the dark red tough skin, the sharp crane's beak immediately pierced through the tough skin and tore with all its might. The sharpened and sharp blade directly cut through the skin from the inside out. It pulled down fiercely, directly cutting out terrifying wounds. Dark red blood immediately spilled out, mixed with intestines and other internal organs that flowed out. They were immediately crushed by other demons or Rhodix's infantrymen. The stench of blood filled the ground, reflecting the increasingly tragic scene of the battlefield. Sharp golden blade. The Mage apprentices raised their magic staffs from behind. After a few incantations, they quickly cast spells that they knew. Status spells were especially important for the infantrymen who were engaged in melee combat. A faint golden light appeared on the spiked warhammer and pickaxe, allowing Rhodix's infantrymen to wield their weapons and pierce through the tough skin of the long-horned demons more easily. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The continuous rain of arrows continued to appear. Loadook's sniper crossbowmen who had already spread out to the 2 wings, as well as the rangers and rangers from Riverstone, began to cover the battlefield with continuous rain of arrows. They aimed at the demon troops that were still charging at Loadook's infantrymen and were entangled in the melee combat. The unbridled pouring of arrows and the use of super long-range attacks forcefully interrupted the long-horned demons that were still trying to continue charging. The siege crossbows, coupled with steel crossbows, could easily pierce through the long-horned demons' skulls. After all, the distance between the 2 sides was less than 50 meters, and it was even easier to pierce through their skin. The heavy bows of the rangers and patrollers of Rhoventon were the same. When paired with all arrows, they were like semi-automatic rifles. With a slight aim, one arrow after another was shot out. The damage to the long-horned demons and imps was even more than the damage caused by the Rhodix infantrymen. In particular, the left and right sides formed a crossfire. One could clearly see that the demons that were being entangled by the Rhodix infantrymen were shot from the sides and behind. The neck and the back of the head were the main targets of the archery masters. After the sound of the commanding power, which stabilized the soldiers' formation, the demons' offensive suddenly weakened. After being caught in close combat between the infantry formations, the demons' wild and violent fighting talent could no longer be used. Although Kant's troops were still at a disadvantage, and there were still Rhodix's infantrymen falling everywhere. But now, it seemed to be enough. Rhodix's square formation, which was used as a chopping board, firmly trapped the demon army. Next, it meant that the Swadian heavy cavalry, who had the sharpest kitchen knives, were about to launch the final attack that could affect the battle situation. Among Kant's battle sequences, the strongest were, of course, his heavy cavalry troops. Chapter 243, The End of the Eradication. Woo! The horn sounded again. Kant used all his strength to blow the long horn. The morale on the battlefield was high. Even if the losses of Rhodix's infantrymen were increasing, with the help of the horn and flag, they were still gritting their teeth and resisting with high spirits. Even if the casualties were increasing and groups of Rhodix's skilled spear wielders began to fall, the demons were still being dragged along. The archers on both sides of the attack were having a hard time. This was an opportunity that Rhodix's infantrymen had used their lives to create for the heavy cavalry. Kant would not allow this opportunity to fly away. As the horn sounded, the heavy cavalry of Swadia behind them, who could no longer hold themselves back, immediately tapped their horses' bellies with their legs and urged their horses to slowly run forward and speed up. They bypassed the curved path and directly arrived at the rear of the demon army. However, a battle of 2,000 people was not as meticulous as a battle of tens of thousands of soldiers. All kinds of front, rear, left and right wings were equipped with armies. Moreover, these demons, who were known for their brutality and madness, did not have any so-called tactics or strategies. Before the start of the battle, they would let the imps and demonized creatures charge forward as cannon fodder, and then the long-horned demons, who were the main force, would enter the battlefield. As for those who stayed behind to guard, other than the superior demons, whose intelligence was not weaker than that of humans, and who were even slightly superior, they could think of these inferior demons did not understand at all, much less know, and felt that it was unnecessary. From the memories in their bloodlines, inferior humans were simply no match for the demons. This concept was very deep, and as it echoed in the minds of these demons, they could not help but feel a sense of contempt and arrogance. The current battlefield also proved this point. Even if the demon army also suffered a large number of losses. However, the losses were all imps and demonized creatures. The true main force, the long-horned demons, had only lost less than 20 of them. At this time, almost half of the human army had died. Close to 100 people had fallen to the ground. The originally thin spear formation was now completely distorted, and they were only relying on their hot blood to resist. It was estimated that it would not be long before the formation was completely destroyed, and they would all be annihilated here. Rumble, 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 rumble. However, the heavy and rapid sound of horse hooves could be heard. The entire karst cave was faintly reverberating with the sound of a flood. Even the sound of the subterranean river was covered, and the howls and howls of the demons were also covered. The 188 Swadian heavy cavalry appeared behind the demons like a flood. They were fully armored, including their horses and men. The thick and long lance was put down, parallel to the head of the warhorse. The awe-inspiring tip of the lance was aimed at the demons who had yet to react. Their faces were still filled with a ferocious smile due to the advantage of the battle. They charged forward fiercely. The flood was unstoppable. The charge of the heavy cavalry was equally unstoppable. Even the Jack Allen warriors who had once donned mail armor and wielded two-handed battle axes were completely annihilated outside the walls of Trondheim. Those who were charged by the heavy cavalry had lost the morale to continue fighting. The complete destruction of their physical and mental strength was enough to prove the terror of the charge of the heavy cavalry. Now, the inferior demons created by the abyss demons had also witnessed the terrifying might of the heavy cavalry. All of them widened their eyes in disbelief and fear as they looked at the heavy cavalry that was getting closer and closer behind them. Woo! The sound of the horn appeared once again. The long sound of the horn carried the momentum of charging forward bravely, inspiring the soldiers who heard the sound of the horn. In the depths of their souls, they extracted the desire for life, the desire for victory, and the desire for glory, turning into an incomparable morale. For Lord Kent. Van Dijk held the Teutonic sword in his hand, his entire body stained with dark red blood spatha. The surrounding Rhodoc's infantrymen charged forward bravely, recklessly using the wide shield on their left arm to press down on the figures of the demons who wanted to scatter, using their own lives to firmly lock them in this space. They were just right for the Swadian heavy cavalry, and were on a straight line of charge. For Lord Kent. The Swadian heavy cavalry roared in rage as well. The well-equipped warhorse galloped at high speed, increasing its own speed. The horse armor and the heavy armor of the riders and riders transformed into inertia that could destroy everything in front of their speed, and it was augmented with the lance in their hands. They charged into the demons. Puff 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 puff. The lance pierced into the flesh. With the support of the warhorse's charge, even the skin and muscles of the demons could not withstand it. Moreover, on the tip of the lance, a faint golden light flickered. The Mage apprentices at the back had already grasped the distance and timing, and directly released the sharp golden blade that could increase the sharpness of their weapons. It had even increased the destructive power of the lance's charge. The 188 Swadian heavy cavalry were directly divided into two rows, whistling as they charged in. The lance easily pierced through the body of the demon. Whether it was the long-horned demon, the imp, or the demonized creature, as long as they dared to be in the charge path of the heavy cavalry, they would be directly pierced through by the lance, like skewers of meat, one after another. Compared to the square formation of the lance from before, it had a defensive type of passive stabbing attack, and the number of demons that were pierced through was even more. The instant charge had pierced through an extremely large number of demons, and even through charging and crashing, the armored warhorse relied on the inertia of its charge to not stop, and similarly trampled many imps and demonized creatures to death. Piles and piles of demons were washed away. However, the long-horned demons were still ferocious. Even if they suffered huge losses in an instant, they still retaliated violently. The heavy cavalry in the front row who had drawn their swords were all pulled off their horses by the 3-meter-tall long-horned demons with their huge claws. Their arms and legs were torn off, and their mouths were full of sharp teeth that were aimed at their heads. Even their necks were torn off. Although the effect of the charge was very strong, the heavy cavalry still did not have the advantage in close combat. "Follow me." Kant used his knight's sword to cut off two of the long-horned demons' fingers. Seeing that there were actually heavy cavalry around them that had been pulled off their horses and tragically turned into corpses under the long-horned demon's rampage, Kant could not help but grit his teeth and roar, "Regroup and continue to organize the charge." Understood. The heavy cavalry fought back with all their might. The kite-shaped shields in their hands blocked the charge, and their hands and swords slashed out, creating a bloody path. However, although those long-horned demons and imps were brutal, they were not stupid and bloodthirsty fools. They could already see the power of the Kant heavy cavalry's charge. In this wave of charge, close to 80 long-horned demons were killed, and more than 200 imps were destroyed. As for those demonized creatures, they had long been consumed in the battle against the infantrymen. There were only a dozen of them left, and they were completely useless. If the heavy cavalry were to charge once more, they would be finished. The crazed eyes of the remaining long-horned demons also revealed their cunning and rationality. They came from the abyss hell, and they were all flesh and blood. They were not completely elemental like elemental creatures, and they had brains. Therefore, they risked their lives to entangle the retreating bodies of the heavy cavalry. As long as they fought in close combat, even these heavy cavalry would not be a match for the agile and terrifyingly strong long-horned demons. Not to mention those imps that held short iron pitchforks. Flapping their wings, the pitchforks stabbed heavily into the bodies of the heavy cavalry or warhorse. Although due to their lack of strength, the weapons in their hands were also inferior cast iron and were unable to cause fatal injuries, the repeated strikes and stabs, they were always able to cause a small number of casualties, causing the heavy cavalry to be extremely annoyed and leave even more slowly. Bandake, stop these demons! Kant was similarly entangled. He repeatedly slashed out with his knight's sword, forcing back a few restless imps. He could not help but shout angrily, "All cavalry, retreat immediately! This is a mandatory order." If this continued, even more heavy cavalry would be killed by those long-horned demons. It was better to be quick than to be in pain. Quickly retreating and reorganizing the charge to completely destroy these demon troops was the result Kant wanted. Even if they lost part of the heavy cavalry, they had to complete it. His orders received a perfect response. Bandake gritted his teeth. Using the Teutonic sword and round shield, he led Rhodix's infantrymen to tangle with the demons. In addition to the crossbowmen and archers on both sides shooting accurately from time to time, the heavy cavalry finally left. They stood still on the square 50 meters away and quickly formed a charging formation. However, at this time, there were only 126 heavy cavalry left. A round of charging. In a short moment, those long-horned demons turned 62 valiant Swadian heavy cavalry into corpses. These were all level 4 cavalry, the heavy cavalry with the best defense. If the Sarandian horsemen, Variga horsemen, and Qieke horsemen were to come here, they would probably fall into close combat with the demons, and the final outcome would be even more tragic. After all, their war horses did not have armor, and those long-horned demons and imps, as long as they took care of the war horse without armor, they would be able to take care of these horsemen. Without the war horse, how could they be called cavalry? How could they launch the most powerful charge? The answer was, of course, impossible. But what Kant had was these Swadian men-at-arms who were fully armored. Rumble, 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 rumble. The flood continued to appear. The might of the charge swept through everything, once again crashing into the formation of the demons. But this time, the charge directly pierced through the ranks of the demons, completely killing the long-horned demons that did not have much left. Stepping on the corpses that littered the ground, they formed a rumbling formation at the rear. In the following battle, Rhodix's infantrymen, who numbered less than 100, would take care of it. The remaining long-horned demons and imps were no longer a threat. There were even demons running away. The red-bottomed golden lion was releasing waves of invisible waves. Faced with an unwinnable situation, the demons would not fight to the death after confirming their complete defeat. It was precisely because they had brains and thought that they would run away, afraid that their lives would be harvested in vain. Moreover, their fear was magnified, and their morale was weakened to the extreme. They did not even dare to retaliate. The swishing sound continued to be heard. The Ravenstone Rangers and Rangers with the least casualties, as well as Rhodix's snipers and crossbowmen, were still drawing their bows and shooting arrows, calling out the demons who had fled far away. They were still trying to eradicate the root of the problem. Chapter 244, Leveling Up of Mage Apprentices. On the battlefield, many demons had already fallen to the ground and turned into corpses. Dark red blood flowed freely. The rich smell of blood was mixed with the unique sulfur smell of demons. Coupled with the dark black blood of the demonized creatures and the rotten smell, it was also pungent and unpleasant, just like a slaughterhouse that had failed the hygiene test. Now the battle was set. Most of the demons were annihilated in the square. Only a few agile imps and a few lucky long-horned demons managed to escape Kant's army's pursuit and escaped into the city wall of the underground city. They were lucky enough to survive. The remaining demons were less than 30 in total, so they were no longer a threat to Kant. Bandake led his troops and gathered again. Everyone was injured, and many of them were limping. It was obvious that they were seriously injured. From the chainmail and shields on their bodies, it could be seen that their original refined appearance had become tattered. It was obvious that after this battle, they had to be repaired or replaced through the system. There was also the treatment of their injuries. Kant had James, a specialist physician, so he did not have to worry. Lord Kant. Van Dyke's tone was filled with relief. We won this battle. That's right, Kant said. This battle wasn't easy. Even if they won, it was close to a Pyrrhic victory. Turning to look at his soldiers, not only were they all injured, their equipment was damaged, and there were many casualties. The brave soldiers that remained on the battlefield made Kant's heart ache. These soldiers were all his elite infantry troops. The top-notch Rhodoks soldiers had combat strength comparable to the peak of knight level. 17 of them died in battle, leaving 23. 133 of Rhodoks' skilled spear wielders had died, leaving 87. As for the Mage apprentices, they were protected by Rhodoks' sniper crossbowmen, who held a wide shield and a spiked warhammer, as well as the Ravenstone rangers and patrollers, who held two-handed greatswords. None of them died in battle, and they only suffered minor injuries. As for the Swadian heavy cavalry, they suffered heavy losses. Of the 188 heavy cavalry soldiers who came, there were only 103 left, and the number of casualties was 85. The 103 who survived all suffered minor injuries. It's really a Pyrrhic victory. Kant frowned. The results of the statistics made him feel extremely depressed. Ever since the expedition army of the Kingdom of Greymane attacked the city, the entire Trondheim had won such a Pyrrhic victory because it was still considered a fortress at that time, and there were fewer troop class. It had been a long time since Kant had lost so many troops in battle. More than half of the 500 troops brought from Aaron's village had suffered casualties. However, it's good that we've won. Kant's expression returned to calmness. A dialog box instantly popped up in the Mind Communication System's eyes. Systems Troop Class Interface. Right behind the troops that Kant was currently leading, there were indeed symbols that represented level up. From the moment they entered the ancient passage to the outside of this underground city, Kant had led his troops to deal with nearly a dozen waves of demonized creatures. They had killed the ancient passage, and there were still the remains of demonized creatures left in the ancient passage. They did not even have the time to dig out the negative energy gemstones in the heart. They could only wait for the follow-up troops to follow up before they had the time to collect these gemstones. However, the experience points obtained in the ancient passage were enough for some of the level 3 and level 4 troop class to level up. Now, they had completely annihilated this demonic troop in the square of the karst cave. The experience points instantly filled up. The entire troop class 3 could even level up continuously. Obviously, the experience points gained from wiping out this demon army was much higher than the demonized creatures that were killed in the ancient passage. It was at least several times higher. It was no wonder. Although the demon army was a strange creature, it could also be considered as a regular army. Demonized creatures were all transformed from wild beasts. They were basically inferior troops. Naturally, their experience points were lower. It was enough to let all the troops level up. Kant was currently lacking troops to continue attacking the dungeon. System, level up. Kant's thought communication system immediately gave an order. The dialog box on the retina changed. Ding system prompt. All members level up, a total of 24,540 dinar. Yes/no, choose level up? This was a notification and confirmation from the system. It was another expenditure of nearly 25,000 dinar, but Kant did not feel any heartache at all. He said in a deep voice, level up confirmed. Instantly, the crisp sound of dinar colliding rang in his ears. Data spread. The entire body of the troop class that could level up was suffused with data. The great power from the system descended and instilled into these troop class. The combat experience, weapons, and equipment that should appear, as well as the body that had become stronger and stronger after growing in age and training. Rhodoks appeared. The Ravenstone Ranger appeared. And the strongest cavalry, the Swadian Knight appeared. The entire troop class led by Kant was upgraded to a level 5 troop class. After regrouping, there were a total of 110 Rhodoks sergeants, 20 Rhodix sniper crossbowmen, 87 Ravenstone Rangers, and 85 Swadian Knight. There were only 302 troops left. However, after the level up of the troop class, their combat strength had increased by several times. Rhodix soldiers, who were as strong as a fortress, the Rhodix sniper crossbowmen, the Ravenstone Rangers who shot accurately and rapidly, and the Swadian Knight who could topple mountains and overturn seas. Van Dijk looked at these elite soldiers, his face full of joy. There wasn't a general who didn't like these elite troop class. Very good. Kant nodded to himself, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. I salute you, my lord. The newly appeared top troop class respectfully bowed to Kant. Their attitude was extremely good. And right behind Kant, there was also a greeting to him, with a bit of calmness, and even a hint of elegance that belonged to a noble. I salute you, my lord. Kant seemed to have thought of something. He turned around abruptly. The 7 mage apprentices were behind him. But when he turned his head, he saw 7 middle-aged mages wearing blue-black mage robes, holding purple-robed staffs with jewels inlaid on top, and blue-black mage hats on their heads. Their appearances could still be vaguely seen. They were the 7 mage apprentices Kant had recruited at that time. But now, they were middle-aged, in their 30s. You have become official wizards. Kant's breathing was a little rough, and his eyes lit up slightly. Apparently, he had already guessed the reason. That's right. The 7 wizards bowed slightly, and their movements were no longer as frivolous as before. They bowed to Kant in a very calm and respectful manner. We have gone through magical learning and training to obtain the quota that you have given us. From there, we obtained the power that we have now, and became official wizards. That's great. Kant nodded. A bright smile appeared on his calm face. This was indeed something to be happy about. These mage apprentices did not level up after experiencing several battles with magic creatures. Unexpectedly, after wiping out the demon army, these mage apprentices' experience points were maxed out. They were able to level up and become 7 official mages who had mastered official spells. Wizard apprentices were equal to a troop class of level 4 from the moment they were recruited. As an upgraded version of the wizard apprentices, the mentor of the Unfoth Empire who was responsible for teaching the wizard apprentices was level up to level 5. Due to the mysterious AoE elemental spells, AoE buffing spells, and the power of spells to summon natural elements, their combat ability was almost impossible to measure with the troop class. This was the reason why Kant had a smile on his calm face. It meant that he had obtained a new army. Mysterious wizard. Van Dijk maintained the army and walked over with respect. He said to Kant with great emotion, they played a great role when they were apprentices. Now that they have become official wizards, it's really exciting. How will their strength increase? But they will definitely be stronger. It's like this, my lord Van Dijk. The leading wizard smiled and explained, the spells we learned went from 3 to 7. 7 spells. Kant nodded, and the number of spells increased by 4. Yes. The wizard continued to explain, our initial magic bullet spell, fireball spell, and sharp golden blade have a stronger power and greater destructive power. In terms of overall effect, it should be 3 times more than when we were apprentices. Yes. Kant nodded. What about the newly learned spells? The newly learned spells are Summoning Lightning, Fatal Deep Freeze, Nature Summoning, and Group Acceleration. The mage explained in detail, Summoning Lightning is a single target attack, Fatal Deep Freeze is a group attack, and Nature Summoning is just like its name. We can summon golems that are based on earth elements. There's also Group Acceleration, Kant said. Yes, this is a status spell, the mage said. Using this spell can provide the soldiers with faster movement speed. Based on our current strength, we estimate that it should increase their movement speed by 30% for 30 minutes, the same duration as the current sharp golden blades. 30% movement speed. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly. That's right, I'm very sure. The leader of the wizards nodded. No, I don't doubt it. Kant chuckled and looked at Bandake, who was also shocked. He smiled and said, just like Bandake, when I heard that it can provide an additional 30% movement speed, I was very surprised. That's right. Bandake nodded and said solemnly, 30% movement speed is very important. 30% movement speed was not to be underestimated. With the infantry, they could quickly fill up the gap in the battle and stabilize the formation. With the archers, they could advance and retreat faster, and the support to the allies would be more timely and accurate. With the cavalry having 30% movement speed, it was even more shocking. The cavalry's speed was already fast. The faster the speed, the stronger the impact, and the more damage they would cause. If it was a top-tier heavy cavalry like the Swadian Knight, combined with the Lion Knight Order medal that Kant had previously obtained, shortening the cavalry's charging distance by 30%, speeding up the charging stage, it was enough to destroy the enemy's front line with a wave of charge. Therefore, why would Kant be suspicious? He could not be happier. Very good, this is very good. Kant nodded and praised the mages. Now, all of you can be considered as battle mages, and can join any army's combat sequence. Chapter 245, Lord of the Abyss Demons. The mages who had already passed the middle age were more composed. Thus, they praised Kant to the point where they could not show their emotions. They only bowed slightly and continued to salute to express the excitement and joy in their hearts. They were real mages, the real battle mages in the battle sequence of the Unfoth Empire. That's right. Kant said seriously, what is your daily spell slot now? In the world of werewinds, there was a limit to the number of spells or divine spell. For example, during the Mage Apprentice period, there were 5 magic bullets, 3 fireballs, and 2 sharp golden blades a day. The overall spell limit was 10 times a day. Unless a special skill was used to increase or supplement, after these spells were cast, they could only watch and use the wooden staff as a wooden stick. It could be said that a mage who did not have a spell slot was not even as strong as a peasant in close combat. If they encountered a slightly trained militia, they would have to surrender. It was the same for mages. There was also a spell slot limit. Our daily spell slots have been greatly improved. The mage in the lead introduced, the magic bullet spell is 20 times a day, the fireball spell is 10 times, and the sharp golden blade is 10 times a day. He paused for a moment, his tone was slightly raised, the summoning of lightning is 5 times a day, the fatal deep freeze is 3 times a day, the natural summoning is 2 times a day, and the group acceleration is 5 times a day. There is a total of 55 spell slots that are restricted, Kant muttered. That's right. The mage nodded. This was already a sufficient improvement. One had to know that when a mage was an apprentice, there were only 10 spell slots. That was the most miserable time. Especially when dealing with demonic troops, creatures that clearly had magic resistance. There was no need for magic bullets or fireballs at all, so they could only cast status-enhancing spells, sharp golden blades. Fortunately, the weapons that were buffed by the sharp golden blades were indeed sharp and very effective. Otherwise, they would really have no choice but to watch. However, it was obviously different at the moment. Each person had a total of 55 spell slots and more than 40 offensive spells. It was almost equivalent to the number of arrows in the quiver of an archer. Considering that the power of spells was stronger than arrows that were purely physical, nature mages were more useful. Moreover, after leveling up to a mage, AoE destructive spells and summoning spells had finally appeared. Fatal Deep Freeze and Nature Summoning. After Kant and the mages had a detailed discussion, they finally understood the details of these 2 spells. Fatal Deep Freeze was to release a cold stream ray with a range of 100 meters. Upon contact with the enemy, it would explode and turn the area of 50 meters times 50 meters into a low temperature of 50 degrees. It would cause ice damage to the enemy and damage the weapons and armor. If one was lucky, it could also directly freeze the enemy to death. Nature's summoning was to communicate with the earth elemental plane of this world and summon golems. The golems were constructed entirely out of stone and was made by the golems of the Mage Tower, not the natural earth elemental giants. Therefore, the activity required magic patterns and gemstones that were carved and inlaid on the surface to maintain it. However, it was still an elemental body. It did not have any vital parts of flesh and blood, nor did it have any restrictions on morale and intelligence. It only listened to the commands of the mages and was extremely valiant on the battlefield. It could withstand several times the flesh and blood creatures. Of course, with the current ability of the mages, one natural summon could only summon 5 golems. There was also the summoning of lightning. This was a single target damage spell. Although it required prediction, its power was really great. The range of the spell was 200 meters, and it could directly summon lightning in the void. Its lethality was shocking. Even the demons in the world of warlords would be seriously injured or killed if they were hit by this lightning. The superior demons with magic immunity would also be slightly affected. After all, it was the damage caused by lightning, so it was naturally destructive. Kant was slightly more confident. Although the Abyss Demon in the underground city was extremely terrifying, with so many top troop class and official mages who could use powerful spells, it was impossible for them not to have the ability to fight back. If the demon army of the previous scale continued to appear, Kant's army would even be able to easily defeat it. Troop Class 5. It was really a bird gun for cannon exchange. Their combat strength was not on the same level at all. Sensing Kant's gaze on the underground city, the mages also turned their heads to look. The mage in the lead said with a more serious expression, "It's really rich negative energy. It's full of violent and crazy demon aura. Although there's a little positive energy gathering outside the city walls to form a seal on the negative energy, it looks like it's in danger. It's already very difficult to seal the demons in this city." "Is that so?" Kant nodded. His expression was calm. It was obvious that he had already expected this. The Abyss Demon had said that this seal could not trap it for too long. Kant did not treat it as a lie. With the strength of that demon, there was no need to lie to him. Moreover, in the temple ruins in the cave of Aaron's village, there were also female succubi that had been sealed and had broken the seal and resurrected. This Abyss Demon was a Lord-level Hell Demon. Its status in Hell was almost equal to a superior, and it was a born superior demon. The leading mage spoke solemnly. He suggested, "My lord, we must not let this demon recover its strength. If we wait for it to break the seal and leave this underground city, then we will have to pay a huge price to destroy it. If we wait for its strength to completely recover, even our teacher leaders and the seniors who are great mages might not be able to deal with that Abyss Demon." "I understand." Kant nodded. His eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a haze in his eyes. How could he not understand? But looking at the troops behind him, Kant asked the mages in a deep voice, "With our current strength, can we kill that Abyss Demon?" "Yes." The mages did not hesitate and nodded solemnly. "So sure?" Kant frowned. "Very sure." The mages answered solemnly and explained, "In our perception, that Abyss Demon is extremely weak. After thousands of years of being sealed, it definitely does not have much power now. I will make a decision." Kant nodded. He had led the troops here to deal with the Abyssal Demon in the first place. It was impossible for the two to reconcile. Then, he would take advantage of the fact that the other party had yet to recover and kill him. "There's more." Kant turned his head. He looked at the mages. "Is there anyone else worth paying attention to in this underground city, such as this Abyss Demon? I don't want our troops to be ambushed and defeated after launching an attack. I absolutely cannot accept such an outcome." "Understood. We will continue to sense now." The mages nodded and joined forces. They closed their eyes and scanned the underground city with their mind power, carefully exploring. But just as they closed their eyes to explore, a surge of power instantly spread out from the city. It was almost locked onto the 7 mages. Kant, who was standing next to them, sensed a fear that came from the bottom of his heart. Although it was dispelled by the red-bottomed golden lion, the fear could not be mistaken. Kant raised his head and looked at the ruins of the city wall. He gritted his teeth and said, "The Abyss Demon." Cough cough, it's it. The mages let out a violent dry cough. There was shock in their eyes. If it was not for the flag intimidation of the enemy spreading quickly, their mind power would definitely suffer a backlash. The leader of the mages said in shock, "The power of this Abyss Demon is really strong. The mind power of the 7 of us can only resist it for a short while. Is something wrong?" Kant frowned. Did they mean that they could not deal with this Abyss Demon? No, the situation is very good. The mage reported quickly, "It is because of the direct contact of mind power that we discovered that this Abyss Demon is really too weak. Its power is not as strong as it was at its peak. We can feel the emptiness," and he paused and said in a deep voice, "Weakness." Boom! The 10-meter-high city wall was instantly destroyed, and large amounts of rubble flew out. The soldiers of Rhodox and the Swadian knight who were on the outside immediately moved forward. They raised the broad shield and the kite-shaped shield in their hands to block the flying stones, and the crackling sounds instantly echoed without end. "Human, are you talking about me?" The Abyss Demon drew its broken rune sword down from the city wall. Its eyes that were filled with violence were filled with actual flames of hell. Sparks were spewing from its nostrils as it roared in a deep voice, talking about the Supreme Lord of the Hell Demon, the King of Evil, the ruler of the flames, Aamon Qieke. That's right, its strength is extremely weak. The mages flashed out from behind the broad shields and said to Kant with certainty, "It's bluffing. You lowly ant, shut your mouth." The flames of hell in the Abyss Demon's eyes burned even more fiercely, and its voice was no longer as calm as before. Instead, it became even more violent and crazy. "The gods are going to cry under my sword. You, wizards who have mastered a few arcane spells, have no right to order me around." It roared angrily, and the strong wind whistled. The strong smell of sulfur was almost pungent, but behind Kant and the others, the red-bottomed golden lion fluttered in the wind, unmoved. "This is no longer your era." Kant snorted coldly, looking at the huge Abyss Demon, and said in a deep voice, "This is our era. What a joke! With just you, these slaves of the gods?" The Abyss Demon stared with its scarlet eyes that were filled with raging flames. Its large hands clung onto the ruins of the city walls, wanting to charge out directly. A terrifying might was spreading wantonly. Kant and the others were the first to bear the brunt. Even though the flag was fluttering, their hearts still throbbed a little. Bang! However, outside the city wall, the golden light instantly appeared. With a sizzling sound, it bounced back the Abyss Demon, Aamon Qieke, who came from hell and had many titles. He used to be extremely terrifying. Although the seal set up by the sun god's descendant was on the verge of collapse, it was still effective. This made the Abyss Demon Aamon Qieke even angrier. "If I break the seal and leave this city, I will let you and your estate know how terrifying the demons from hell will be." Aamon Qieke let out an angry roar. "Is that so? I'm afraid you won't be able to wait until then." Kant snorted coldly. Chapter 246, Temptation of Aamon Qieke. Kant came back here was not to listen to this abyssal demon brag about its past glory. It was to take its life. The soldiers had already taken action. The Ravenstern Rangers and Rhodoc crossbowmen were the first to move forward. They raised their heavy bows and siege crossbows at the same time, aiming their all arrows and steel bolts directly at the enormous Abyss Demon at the relics of the city wall. They had already taken aim and were waiting for orders. Arrogant humans! The abyssal demon Aamon Qieke was burning with rage. The race that it had once looked down upon the most was dared to challenge it in such an arrogant manner after 10,000 years. It was like an ant challenging a giant. It was an absolute overestimation of oneself and a challenge to its dignity. Moreover, the abyssal demon Aamon Qieke was in his weakest status. Just like what the human mage had said. This stirred up the matter in its heart that it was most furious about and was unwilling to bring up. It was true that it did not have a good solution to these humans, or even a solution at all. It was unable to break out of the seal that set up by the sun god's descendant. It was unable to personally deal with these humans. Even if it sent the inferior demons that it had accumulated and created, it was still unable to fight with these humans. The inferior demons' troops were almost completely annihilated, and only a few managed to escape. Now, these humans still dared to point their bows and crossbows at it. Aamon Qieke felt that its dignity had been seriously challenged. However, there was nothing it could do. The fury in its eyes suddenly dissipated a little when it faced those Ravenstern Rangers and Rhoda crossbowmen. Only a certain kind of suppressed anger was gathering. Surprisingly, its big mouth gave a warning-like advice. Human noble, I can give you gold that is as tall as a mountain, and I can also give you power that is comparable to the gods. Why did you choose to become my enemy at this time instead of cooperating with me? I, the Lord of Hell, swear to the abyss of hell in my name, Aamon Qieke. When you help me break the seal, you will get everything you want. Everything. Kant smiled and lowered his head as if he was deep in thought. However, the soldiers behind him did not put down the weapons in their hands. They continued to aim at the relics of the city wall 200 meters away, at the huge abyssal demon Aamon Qieke. This was because they understood their lord. Kant would not cooperate. How could humans cooperate with the demons? This was tantamount to asking for the skin from a tiger. How is it, noble human? The era of the gods has passed. You were once the lowliest slaves of the gods. We can cooperate, we can overthrow the high and mighty gods together. Aamon Qieke whispered softly. But his voice seemed to be imprinted in Kant's ears. It aroused the desire in the bottom of his heart. Strength, wealth, beautiful women. Power and eternal life. What a tempting suggestion. I think what you said makes sense. Kant raised his head and laughed lightly. That's right. Whatever you want, I will bestow upon you the noble of mankind. Aamon Qiek's eyes carried a hint of mischief. However, deep in its eyes, there was a brutality and madness. Your life, Kant said softly. This is very simple. Aamon Qieke laughed softly. The moment he opened his mouth, his expression instantly stiffened. A stunned expression appeared on his ferocious face. He subconsciously asked, "What?" "Your life," Kant repeated. He raised his head to look at the gigantic abyssal demon, Aamon Qieke, and slowly said, "To be more precise, I want you to die." Human! How dare you tease me? The flames of hell in Aamon Qiek's eyes instantly rose. It crazily slashed inner wall of the city with its broken rune sword, causing large pieces of stone and bricks to shatter. The strong wind that was filled with anger and a strong smell of sulfur blast past Kant and the others. Release the arrows. However, Kant was unmoved. He let his hair flutter in the wind, but his voice was unusually calm. Shoot freely. Kant said that he wanted his life. He was really going for it. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The Ravenstern Rangers and Rhoda crossbowmen were already prepared. As Kant's voice fell, a rain of arrows instantly poured out. The all arrow and the steel crossbow arrow flew side by side. However, the distance of 200 meters was within the range of these level 5 top-notch shooters. Roar! Aamon Qieke let out a wild and violent roar was emitted its mouth. A faint dark red light appeared in the depths of his throat. The smell of sulfur was even denser, and the temperature in the air seemed to rise. A wave of hellfire surged out of his throat. Huff huff huff. The flames were rolling on the ground 30 meters in front of Aamon Qieke. It was like an evil dragon spitting fire. It was more like a fire-breathing tank that Kant had seen in his previous life. It carried surging air currents and raging flames as it rolled in the air. The high temperature instantly burned the tail of the arrow. The arrow lost its ability to control its direction, causing the entire arrow to burn with flames. It lost the momentum and fell to the edge of the city wall. It was completely unable to cause any damage to Aamon Qieke in the relics. However, in the flames, 20 silver beams pierced through the wall of fire and shot directly at Aamon Qieke's head. The sharp bolts were stained red as they pierced through its skin. Roar! The hellfire in its mouth stpped. Aamon Qieke covered his face with his hand and pulled the steel bolts off his face. For a head that was close to 3 meters long, a steel bolt that was only 30 centimeters long could not cause any fatal damage. It was like a human being pricked by a needle. Although it was painful, it could not cause any damage. A huge body not only had terrifying strength, but it also had extremely strong defense. One had to attack the weak points. The archers obviously also noticed this. As the captain of the crossbowmen, and also the current footman general, Boondook ordered in a deep voice, "Everyone, shoot the demon's eyes, chest, arms, and legs." Yes. The Ravenstern Rangers and Rhodak crossbowmen responded to his order. The rain of arrows continued. They were not disheartened by the defeat just now. They had the advantage. They could shoot at ease because the terrifying abyss demon Aamon Qieke could not leave the seal of the buried city at all. It could only passively defend. To the archers, even their attacks were just like some scratches, but they could still scratch this abyssal demon to death. The rain of arrows shot by the group of top-tier archers finally worked. The abyssal demon Aamon Qieke howled in anger. The brutal and crazy aura followed the gusts of wind that filled with the power of the demons and almost covered the entire interior of the karst cave. The echo shook their eardrums faintly. The anxiety in the bottom of the soldiers' hearts, however, began to stabilize as the battle continued. The golden lion on the red bottom was fluttering in the wind. Kant raised and blew his horn, and the steady and long horn sound suppressed the howl. The archers' morale was extremely high. Occasionally, the mages would also cast magic balls and fireballs, but because the magic resistance of the superior demons was too high, such low-level spells could not pose an effective threat at all. Chapter 247, Entanglement of Golems. Mages wanted to use high-level spells. It was the most powerful single-target damage spell they could master. Lightning summon. Extremely powerful lightning would fall from the sky. Even the abyssal demons with extremely high magic resistance would be slightly disturbed. It was much, much stronger than low-level damage spells, magic bullet spells, and fireball spells. Moreover, this world was not really a world where heroes were invincible. It was just similar to a fantasy world. Wait. Kant rejected the mage's requests. Such a critical destructive spell could not be used casually. For the current abyssal demon Aamon Qieke, even if it was struck multiple times by the summoned thunderbolts, the terrifying damage would probably not pose much of a threat to him, who was immune to magic. On the contrary, it would be a waste of the mage's precious spell slots. Continue shooting. Next to him, Boondook pulled the trigger and fired the steel crossbow bolt. However, the steel crossbow bolt pierced the surface of the abyssal demon Aamon Qiek's skin and could not cause any fatal damage. It was the same with the shooting of the Ravenstern Rangers and the Rhodak crossbowmen. Even if the rain of arrows poured down, Aamon Qieke was still howling in anger at the relics of the stone wall. He was using his body to slam heavily against the seal outside the city wall. His red eyes proved that he had entered the stage of madness, even if the collision caused the countless hidden sacred sun pattern on the ground to light up. The positive energy that sent it flying or stimulated the demon power was mixed with the sizzling negative energy. Black smoke came out from its body, but it was still going mad. Demons were not a race that knew how to think. Even if they were intelligent superior demons, after experiencing such humiliation, being trapped by seals, and being humiliated by lowly and weak humans, they were furious beyond words. Lowly and arrogant humans, you will pay the price in the end. Aamon Qieke let out a furious roar. It used its broken rune sword to slash heavily at the void in front of it. However, every time, a golden light would appear. The broken sword that heavily slashed at the void, making a crisp sound like metal crisscrossing with metal. The seal from 10,000 years ago still had a powerful effect. Release the arrows. Kant did not care at all. He extended his hand forward and the rangers and sniper crossbowmen steadily fired. The all arrows and steel crossbows almost covered the entire space. Aamon Qieke was shot like a hedgehog. The densely packed small arrows were nailed on its face and body. 87 Ravenstern rangers and 20 Rhotic crossbowmen, the number of arrows they shot was more than 6,000. It was definitely enough to finish this battle. If they ignored the tiredness of their arms, they could have shot all the arrows in the shortest time. Grinding this abyssal demon to death was Kant's plan. Roar! Aamon Qiek's face was a bloody mess. There were even many steel crossbows and cone arrows on his eyelids because the rain of arrows was too dense. These were all superficial wounds. But it was still unacceptable to it. After spitting out hell flames several times, the battle was still in a stalemate. It was trapped in the seal and unable to rush out to kill the ants that made it extremely angry. It could only choose to retreat. It regained its rationality, and a little of its brutality and madness faded away. If the stalemate continued, it would only be at a disadvantage. With heavy footsteps, the gigantic abyssal demon retreated into the inner walls of the city. Although the seal had limited its range of movement, the other seals within the underground city had long been destroyed by it. It was able to stay in the complicated city, engaging in battle with these humans while avoiding the rain of arrows that caused it pain. Mage, summon the golem and tie it down. At this moment, Kant waved his hand, signaling the mage to start preparing spells. He would not allow the abyssal demon to retreat back into the underground city. The complicated city environment was the battlefield of the abyssal demon. Its gigantic body could easily crush any house that obstructed it. At the same time, it could cause Kant's troops to be hindered in their advance. They would then be trapped in house after house and ruins, unable to move. Even if they were split into small groups, they could only be beaten by the demons one by one. The mages instantly raised their magic staffs inlaid with white gems. As they rapidly chanted the spells, 7 rays of light instantly appeared at the relics of the city walls. The spatial fluctuations were spreading. Roar! The abyssal demon Aamon Qieke, who was still retreating, instantly turned around. Looking at the 35 golems that appeared in the void fluctuations, their bodies were made of stone and covered in fine golden patterns. They held two-handed hammers in their hands. Aamon Qieke's scarlet eyes were filled with furious rage. It roared, "Golems of the gods? Humans, you are still the slaves of the gods." Obviously, it knew these golems, and it knew more about the other similar golems. However, Kant had no intention of explaining. Waving their hands forward, the mages immediately controlled the golems, raised the two-handed hammers in their hands, and slowly walked toward the huge abyssal demon. The 2.5-meter-tall golems looked very sturdy and strong. But in front of the 6-meter-tall and huge abyssal demon, they looked like deformed and pitiful creatures. Just these inferior golems. Aamon Qieke laughed wildly, and the brutality in its eyes became more and more intense. It slashed down heavily by his broken rune sword, directly sending more than surrounding 10 golems flying. They landed heavily on the nearby city wall and were smashed until the rocks of their bodies cracked, even the rocks on their hands and feet were broken. Although the golems were stronger than ordinary flesh and blood creatures, they did not know how to dodge and were no match for the abyssal demons. They could not even get close to them and were easily smashed away one by one. And at this time, Kant had already led the archers and approached the relics of the city wall. The rain of arrows continued. The mages pointed their staffs forward, and another 35 golems appeared in the void. Right beside the legs of the abyssal demon, they raised their war hammers and smashed them down heavily. Roar! Aamon Qieke let out a furious roar. He slashed repeatedly using the broken rune sword in his hand. But because the golems were too close to them, it was unable to destroy the group of golems in once. Even the golems that were sent flying earlier had recovered. Their limbs were broken and their bodies were shattered. As long as they could move, they would crawl over and raise their war hammers to fight with it. The golems were not afraid of death. For a time, the abyssal demon Aamon Qieke was actually held back by the golems behind the city wall. Arrows rained down. The rangers and crossbowmen were less than 100 meters away. They were practically standing on the outermost seal, drawing their bows and shooting arrows. They quickly shot their own all arrows and steel crossbows, pinning arrows all over the body of the entangled abyssal demon. It was truly like hedgehogs. This group of top-notch archers not only had extraordinary archery skills, but they were also sly. Since they could not heavily injure the main body of this demon, they aimed at the joints, especially the ligaments on their legs. As long as it was a living creature, losing the ligaments on their thighs and calves was equivalent to losing the ability to move. And the sharp arrowheads and crossbows really pierced through the ligaments bit by bit. Chapter 248, The Terror of Summoning Lightning. Roar! A painful howl appeared. Aamon Qique's 2 legs fell heavily to the ground. Its heels were dripping with blood, and the tendons and ligaments of its feet had been completely torn apart. An opportunity. Bunduq was excited from behind as he took a step forward. The siege crossbow in his hand was pulled, and he shot with his fully loaded steel crossbow. At the same time, he quickly said to Kant, "Lord, you can attack now." Without the ability to move, even the abyssal demon was like fish on a chopping board. "Wait." Kant's expression was solemn. He raised his hand to indicate that they should not act rashly. He turned to look at the mages and ordered in a low voice, "Use the summoning lightning." The target, he looked at the 2 bloody heels and said in a heavy voice, "I want you to completely shatter its 2 feet. Understood," the mages nodded. This was very simple for them. They raised their staffs and chanted a mysterious spell to communicate with the rules of this world. The space at the top of the cave began to fluctuate. Roar! Aamon Qique raised his head. Having experienced the battle of the gods, it naturally knew that this was the power of a spell. It might have been able to ignore this spell in the past, but now, he was already weak and had broken the seals one after another. He had used up more than half of the power he had. Now, he was still heavily injured and could not resist at all. The magic resistance of a superior demon was extremely high, it was almost immune to magic. But it also depended on the situation. Losing power was the same as losing magic resistance. Now, Aamon Qique could only clench its teeth and rely on its powerful demon body to forcefully resist the 7 thick thunderbolts that were fiercely slashing down from the void. Boom, 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 boom. The 7 thunderbolts seemed to appear from the void of lightning realm. Carrying the absolute brutal strength and scorching heat that far surpassed the flames, the thunderbolts struck heavily at the bottom of Aamon Qique's legs. They struck on its feet which were already dripping with blood and it was in great pain due to the torn ligaments and tendons. Its useless heels and its flesh were roasted and scorched in an extremely short period of time. Aoo! A shrill howl once again shouted from Aamon Qique's mouth. His eyes suddenly widened. Red blood vessels covered its pupils, as if the pain had engraved on its soul and was unbearable. What a powerful destructive power! Bunduq's pupils instantly shrank. Not only him, even the soldiers behind him, Rhotic sergeants, the Swadian knights, Rhotic crossbowmen, as well as those Ravenstern rangers, were all dumbstruck as they watched the 7 thunderbolts appear from the void and struck in the blink of an eye. They heavily struck Aamon Qique's heels. The terrifying power of the lightning could completely represent the might of the heavens. The waves of thunderbolts that struck down were like the raging thunder of a stormy night, and the sound of the explosion made everyone scared. Everyone was fear of such a terrifying sound. However, Kant was extremely calm. Even he was shocked when he saw the lightning for the first time. Continue. Kant's voice was very calm. The mages behind him had a tacit understanding. They raised their staffs again. Boom, 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 boom. Another 7 thunderbolts appeared. They streaked across the void, bringing with them the pure destructive power. In an instant, they descended on the charred and blackened heels. Bright lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. When the lightning dissipated, traces of electricity were still left on the 2 calves of Aamon Qieke. Meanwhile, the white bones pierced through the skin and flesh of its blackened and charred heels. Its entire calves were already dripping with blood. The brutal destructive power of the lightning severely injured its lower legs and even extended to his thighs. Aamon Qique's miserable howl had already disappeared. Its entire body was lying on the ground. Its slightly trembling body was still suffused with a faint black smoke. "Don't stop, continue." Kant's eyes did not have the slightest bit of pity. He turned his head to look at the mages who had already stopped and berated in a deep voice, "Use all of your summoning lightning. My order is to pour all of it onto this abyssal demon's body." "Yes," the mages responded and continued to raise their staffs. Bolts of lightning as thick as a human's thigh struck down. The lightning flashed and rumbled. When the lightning struck together, they even formed a plasma-like lightning ball swimming around. Aamon Qique's entire heel was completely broken. Its white bones had been charred black by the temperature of the lightning, and even the black smoke on its lower body was pervading the air. The demon's aura was getting weaker and weaker. It was as if the thunderbolts had struck its body and completely depleted its remaining demonic power. As battle mages of the Unfoth Empire, they did not need to learn too many spells. They only needed to learn a few, the most typical and most useful spells on the battlefield, and that would be enough. For example, summoning lightning. Under the terrifying power of lightning, no enemy could be unharmed. A mage's summoning lightning was limited to 5 spell slots per day. 7 people meant 35 times. There was a total of 35 thunderbolts striking down. The power generated was enough to break the foot of Aamon Qique, the abyssal demon. After all, even abyssal demons had their own weaknesses. For example, the eyes and brain, the throat and heart, and the weak knee joints, all these weaknesses were similar to an ordinary person. As well as the ligaments of the limbs and tendons of the hands and feet. "Is it dead? Is it dead?" The soldiers behind widened their eyes in shock as they looked at Aamon Qique, who was lying motionless on the ground. The nearly 6-meter-long body of the abyssal demon was still gave a visual shock. Even though it was lying on the ground in such a messy state, the demon was still a demon. "How is it?" Kant turned his head and asked the mages in a deep voice, "How is the status of the abyssal demon?" "Extremely weak," the mage replied. "We can send footmen over to take a look." "Yes," Kant nodded. There was a hint of pity in his eyes. The natural summoning spell had been used up completely. The golem statues were all killed by the abyssal demon Aamon Qique. They were shattered into the most ordinary stones and could no longer be controlled and commanded. He could only arrange the footmen for the investigation mission. However, the battlefield could be very cruel sometimes. Not only to the enemy, but also to his own soldiers. Kant pointed to the 5 Rhotic sergeants in the front row and ordered them expressionlessly, "Go and take a look at that demon. I want to know the most accurate information." "Understood." The 5 Rhotic sergeants nodded and walked forward quickly without any hesitation. They obeyed the order. Stepping on the broken stones all over the ground, they entered the underground city from the relics of the city wall. The abyssal demon, Aamon Qique, seemed to have really fainted. No matter how close the sergeants came to its side, it did not move at all. "Safe," the sergeants reported to the back. "Very good," Kant nodded and walked forward. However, just as he almost stepped into the sacred sun pattern, he stopped and turned his head to give a signal to Bunduk behind him. He mouthed, "Cut its throat." Bunduk was stunned for a moment before he understood. He nodded and walked forward. He gripped the spade tightly. He came to the side of Aamon Qique's huge head that was buried in the relics. He held the spade with both hands and stabbed it into the trachea of the neck. Dark red blood spurted out, there was even a burning feel that sprayed all over Bunduq's body. Chapter 249, Ranger's First Aid Methods. The dark red devil's blood seemed to be corrosive. Scorching white smoke instantly appeared on Bunduq's body. Even if he wore chain armor, it was useless. It corroded the linen robe on the outside and followed the gaps of the chain armor. It also corroded the linen underwear on the inside. When it came into contact with his flesh, it sizzled like roasted meat. Ah! Bunduq instantly let out a muffled groan. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead and cheeks. The veins on his entire face popped up, and his face began to turn abnormally red. More than half of his body was splattered with demon blood. White smoke sizzled out, and it was as if his entire body was about to corrode. As for the spade in his hand, he could not hold it in his hands and it fell to the ground. The sword that had been stabbed into his throat and stained with dark red blood was also emitting white smoke. It was obvious that even the fine iron weapons were corroded by the demon blood. Save him! Kant's face was solemn, but he was not afraid of the danger in the front. He quickly ordered his soldiers behind him in a deep voice, "Go to the subterranean river and fetch water. Tear off Bunduq's clothes and quickly wash his wounds with clean water." Using clean water to wash and dilute the corrosive liquid was the stupidest way to deal with such matters. But Kant had no choice. The soldiers behind him quickly moved forward. They carried the struggling Bunduq together with the other soldiers who went in first and carried him back. White smoke was still rising from his body. The smell of burnt flesh mixed with the smell of blood. In just a short while, Bunduq's body was covered in blood. His entire body was curled up and twitching. His face and lips were pale. There were also blue veins protruding from his forehead and neck. His face was ferocious. "Take off all your clothes and chain mail. Hurry up!" Kant ordered. The Ravenstern Ranger took out the dagger on his boots and directly cut open the corroded and damaged linen robe. The slightly darker color of the chainmail actually turned black along with the dark red devil's blood. Tiny bubbles were popping up as he forcefully tore it off. The entire chain armor was torn off, revealing the bloody body inside. Fresh blood was flowing, but the dark red blood formed some kind of pattern and directly seeped into the body. The skin of the entire abdomen was corroded. Even as he twitched, one could see the corroded intestines. "Damn it!" Kant gritted his teeth. "The evil energy is really dense. We must first cleanse it." The Ravenstern Ranger turned to Kant and said solemnly, "Lord Bunduq's injuries are very serious. We must be mentally prepared for him to leave us. First rescue, you guys come." Kant's breathing was rapid as he ordered these rangers in a deep voice. "Yes," the rangers nodded solemnly. Bunduq was one of Kant's few generals. Although he was the captain of the crossbowmen, they had a perfect cooperation with the fraction of Kingdom of Rhodix through him. Kant absolutely did not want to see his general leave him. And after spending a few days together, the relationship between the Ravenstern Rangers and Bunduq had also greatly increased. After all, he was a famous gentleman in the continent of Karadia. He was also kind and loving to the commoners, and he had attractive personal charm. These rangers, who also had the responsibility of protecting their homes and commoners, were very happy to be friend with him. Thus, the Ravenstern Rangers were also not willing to see Bunduq die. As the most dangerous location in the Pendar continent, the top archers of the Kingdom of Ravenstern, who defended against the barbarians in the Misty Mountains, had their own unique understanding of minor injuries. At the very least, they could treat and handle the wounds by themselves. After all, the barbarian shaman in the Misty Mountains also had a small amount of magic power left over from the ancient times. Although it was weak magic power, it could still pose a threat. Therefore, the Ravenstern Rangers were very experienced in treating similar injuries. Therefore, at this time, the elite soldiers who fought on the front lines were stronger than the mages who only knew spells and fight. At least, the mages did not know anything about surgery, let alone healing spells. "The water is here." The Swadian knights quickly came over with more than 10 buckets of water. Very good, the 3 rangers who were in charge of treating the injuries nodded. They took the linen cloth and wet it, quickly wiping and cleaning the wound that was still emitting white smoke. The linen cloth was quickly dyed red, and it was also stained with demon blood. It was corroded and destroyed. The ranger threw the linen to the side. The linen was quickly corroded until it was soft and broken. The devil's blood was as terrifying as strong sulfuric acid. The linen was stained with water and could only be wiped for only a few times because it was corroded by the devil's blood and could only be replaced. However, the effect was still there. After being diluted by water, a large part of the abdomen was still badly mutilated, but the demon's blood no longer corroded the flesh and internal organs. The sizzling white smoke disappeared. As for Bunduq, his face was already pale and he fainted with a head full of cold sweat. The pain was almost like scraping the bones to heal the wounds. Even he could not bear the pain. However, the mage nodded at the side and said with a calm expression, "It's effective. The negative energy corroding the flesh is rapidly decreasing. Although there is still a little bit left, it will not continue to corrode the flesh." Very good. Kant reached out his hand and touched Bunduq's nose. There was still a weak breath. Kant's expression was slightly calm. He nodded and praised the rangers who were still using daggers and linen to clean the wounds. "It's all thanks to you guys. If it weren't for you guys, I would definitely have lost an important general." "We are only doing our best," the rangers replied modestly. After cleaning the wounds, Bunduq's abdomen was no longer filled with the previous corrosive wound. However, the rangers still suggested to Kant, "In our opinion, it's best to send Lord Bunduq back to the village as soon as possible and let Lord James carry out surgery and professional recuperation. Otherwise, just by cleaning the wounds alone, it's impossible to completely heal Lord Bunduq injuries. If we delay too long, there might still be wound infections and even complications that can still lead to unpredictable outcomes. Then immediately send someone to transport Bunduq back." Kant nodded. The ranger's suggestion was correct. Turning his head to look at the few docile pack horses that followed behind to transport supplies, he instructed the 7 Swadian knights, "All of you, immediately bring the pack horses and transport Bunduq back for treatment." "Understood," the Swadian knights nodded. They carefully placed Bunduq, who had temporarily bandaged his wounds, on the stretcher that was on the 2 pack horses. They led the team towards the ancient passageway without the slightest hesitation. This was a critical moment to begin with. Everyone understood that time was critical, and they needed to act as soon as possible. Demon blood. Kant turned his head to look at the spathe that had fallen between the rocks. This was Bunduq's weapon. But now, it had been corroded until it turned black. The entire wooden sword hilt had been corroded until it was rotten and fell off. The demon blood contains their power. It's brutal, crazy, and chaotic. We humans are simply unable to come into contact with the power of such a demon, including the demon blood. The mages explained with grim expressions. Chapter 250, Hint of System Quest. Kant already had some understanding of the demon's blood. Although there was no specific explanation given to this world, but it was most likely similar to the various movies and videos that he had seen in his previous life. Perhaps the most famous was that the orcs were bewitched by Gul'dan and drank the demon's blood, turning into the evil orcs. However, Kant turned his head and looked at the abyssal demon that could even corrode iron, and his brows relaxed slightly. This was not War of Warcraft. The blood of demons had a strong corrosive nature, but it was unable to lure others into depravity. Kant was still more concerned about Bunduq's safety. His expression was somewhat solemn as he slowly stood up. He turned his head and said in a low voice to the Rhodoc sergeants behind him, "Everyone, enter the inner part of the city wall. If that demon still has any signs of life," he paused, Kant's voice was unusually solemn. "Then kill it completely." "Understood," Rhodoc sergeants nodded. They hung the warhammer back on their waist. With the broad shield on their back, he picked up the heavy glaives and strode into the city wall. "My lord, we will listen to your arrangements." The Swadian knights led their armored war horses and lined up neatly. Holding the heavy lance tightly in their hands, their faces were solemn. As knights, they were also eager to prove themselves in battle and obtain the honor that everyone respected. "Wait here." However, Kant did not agree with their desire to participate in the battle. Kant held his knife sword tightly. He stepped forward and ordered in a low voice, "All archers, line up. If you encounter any unusual circumstances, you are allowed to shoot on your own." "Understood," the Ravenstern Rangers and Rhodoc crossbowmen immediately responded. Kant considered it carefully. With the extremely strong defense and close combat strength of Rhodoc sergeants, entering the buried city to investigate first was undoubtedly the best choice. If they encountered any unusual situations, such as demons that had broken the seal, then these top-level archers who were on guard at the outside could provide the necessary support. As for the Swadian knights, they could also attack and retreat. Whether they entered the buried city to support Kant or Kant and the others had to retreat immediately, they were the final guarantee. After all, this place had been occupied by the abyssal demons for tens of thousands of years. If they were not careful and encountered some terrible situations, the one who would regret it would be Kant himself. That's right. He planned to enter the inner part of the city wall personally and take a good look at this dungeon. Special quest and side quest from the system both indicated that this dungeon was the key to completing the quest. As the only candidate related to the system, Kant had to enter this dungeon. He was determined to get the rewards after completing these two quests. With 110 Rhodoc sergeants protecting him and 7 official mages accompanying him, there was no room for mistake. Kant took a step forward and ordered in a deep voice, "Let's go." The mages behind him immediately followed. Inside the city wall, the sergeants had already spread out and lined up on the ground. The demon's body was emitting a little black smoke and both of its feet had been broken by lightning. There were also many houses that had collapsed in the dungeon. One could only vaguely see the ruins of the central main road. The burning flames, the slashing of the heavy sword, and the house that had collapsed caused by the kicks were all done by this abyssal demon, who was angry and furious because of being sealed. It had turned many houses in the entire underground city into ruins. Kant moved forward and walked past the sacred sun pattern that seemed to be engraved on the stone slab outside the city wall. Finally, he walked past the ruins of the city wall and arrived at the inner part of the underground city. A dialog box immediately popped up on his retina. "After your tireless efforts, the special quest has been completed. Special quest, bear the consequences. Reward, 10,000 dinars, 1,000 reputation, 10 honor. Introduction, you have successfully arrived at the ruins under Aaron and discovered the ancient passage. You think that the source of everything might be the place where the ancient passage leads to. When you came to the karst cave and found those demons, you thought that this might be the source of the abnormality. After your tireless efforts, the temporary quest has been completed. Temporary quest, explore the secrets of the ancient passage. Reward, level up, village. Introduction, when you arrive at the end of the ancient passage, the air is filled with mysterious power. After observing, you found that this was an extraordinary power that originated from the ancient times. Perhaps this ancient extraordinary power could bring about new changes. However, from the looks of it, the underground city that you found was already in ruins and was occupied by demons. The data frame disappeared. However, the new data frame suddenly reappeared in front of him. Main quest, kill the abyssal demon. Reward, random village. Introduction, you have discovered that terrifying abyssal demon. You have made an estimation in your heart. This is the strongest creature that you have ever seen in this world. Therefore, based on the principle that wealth brings sin, you intend to kill it. Moreover, there is nothing that can be pitted about a chaotic creature like a demon. Even if it appears to be heavily injured and has lost its ability to resist, who can say if it is pretending to want to take the opportunity to counterattack? Don't believe the demon. Kant's originally calm expression instantly changed. His pupils contracted. He looked at the abyssal demon that was still lying on the ground. The originally dense black smoke had already dissipated into the air. Rhodoc Sergeant was standing by the side. He swept his gaze over the neck that had been cut open and was still bleeding like a trickle. Although he still tried to maintain his poker face, his face had clearly become much more relaxed. Its neck had been cut wide open. Ordinary creatures would not be able to survive. At the very least, in the eyes of the Karadia people, cutting the windpipe in the neck was equivalent to dying in battle. However, this was not Karadia. It was also not a creature that ordinary people could understand. This was an abyssal demon. A superior who came from a plane of negative energy like hell and the abyss. It was already impossible to compare them with ordinary creatures. Even if they cut open its necks and windpipes, could they relax? However, Kant remained expressionless. The system had already reminded him that the seemingly heavily injured and dying abyssal demon was actually waiting for him to approach it, walking right into its trap, and then annihilating all of his relaxed troops here. Only waiting for him to approach. However, not only would Kant not approach, but he would also take the opportunity to completely kill this demon. He gave a signal behind him. The mages were slightly stunned, but they immediately understood. The surrounding Rhodoc sergeants also noticed Kant's signal, and their expressions became slightly solemn. This included the archers and knights outside the city walls. Everyone was prepared to completely surround and kill this abyssal demon. Begin. Kant waved his hand and ordered softly. The mages raised their magic staffs. Magic balls and fireballs were being prepared. They might not pose much of a threat to this high-level demon, but with the archers and the surprise attacks of Rhodoc sergeants, they would also have a miraculous effect. The rules of magic were eternal. Even if one could be immune to low-level magic, one needed to have the corresponding strength. And this abyssal demon, Aamon Qieke, was indeed in a seriously injured status. Could it block it? Maybe not.